I'm Lawrence Jenkins. I'm the Dean of the College of Visual and Performing Arts. I am joining you from behind the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Fall River. And I'm joining you from here because at 10 o'clock, our visiting artist, Tracy Cockrell, is leading a walk, an art walk, which is part of the Fabric Fest in Fall River. It's in its second year. It's an amazing event featuring contemporary art and music, and CVPA and UMass Dartmouth are actually front and center in that this year, and I hope for years to come. So it's really exciting for me to be here. If my cell phone runs out of juice or it starts to rain, I'll retreat to the car, which is less picturesque. Am I still there?
You
Sorry,
are back.
I didn't count on getting calls in the middle of this. Anyway, what I wanted to present this morning was not just me talking about CVPA, which I can do ad nauseum because there are so many exciting things that are happening in our college. But what I wanted instead was to let you hear from one of our students, Marcus Johnson, who is a senior at CVPA. He participated last summer in the Summer Innovation Program at MassDigi, which is an organization that's housed at Becker College that is part of a program to educate game designers and artists. It's a program to develop game arts in Massachusetts as well. And UMass Dartmouth was really thrilled to be able to field a team, and Marcus will explain it, but we had three people from computer science in their game design program and two game artists from CVPA. So if it's all right, Emery, I'm going to turn it over to Marcus, and then I'm here afterwards to answer questions that you all might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so I guess that means it's my turn now, right?
Yes, it is, Marcus.
Sure.
So my name is Marcus Johnson, first and foremost. Thank you very much for having me here. And I suppose we can just jump right into this sort of presentation that I've got here. Make sure that everything's set up correctly. So you guys can see this no problem, right?
Yes.
All right, lovely.
So just fine.
MassDigi, as was introduced, is part of normally the Becker College, and the program that both myself and a colleague of mine, or several colleagues of mine, were able to take part of is an initiative program that is reaching out to Dartmouth for the first time this year. So we were very much guinea pigs with this program, on top of the fact with the whole aspect of it being exclusively online on top of that. So first and foremost, let me just say that it was a unique experience from what would be typical for MassDigi, but still a excellent learning experience nonetheless. Also, I have here written CIPD. If you hear me saying MassDigi or CIPD interchangeably, they're the same thing. And you'll also notice that the subtitle here is How I Learned That Making Video Games Requires a 200 IQ, because it really truly does. It takes a lot of consideration and thought in order to make these sorts of things, but we'll get into that. First, allow me to explain the dynamics. MassDigi, or CIP, for the summer program has a whole bunch of students, all about the same age and level of experience with game design. And they're broken up into 5 different teams, each team having about 5 or 6 different people in them. So our team was composed exclusively of people from UMass Dartmouth, hence the name CIPD, whereas someone else might have a different letter for their CIP group. Artists included myself and Mike. We had a couple programmers who were part of computer science, Ryan, Jack, and John. And we also had a producer who had prior experience with Becker College. He helped organize and keep us all honest with each other, and his name was Mikey. And we worked from 9 to 5:30 every weekday for several weeks throughout the entire summer. And during that time, not only did we work, but we had opportunities to talk with our peers and professionals in the business to be able to ask them questions and have them review our game progress and be able to learn that way. During the first couple of weeks, we ended up going through orientation. And I think it was during these orientation weeks that I ended up doing a lot of heavy learning. One of them is about player motivation, which I think is very well represented in this chart here. You can see that there are 6 major categories, and what these categories are types of people who play games. And it's very much along the model of knowing what your player wants, because a game, just like any sort of media, is designed to fulfill a fantasy. They want to be or become something. They want to like experience something. And so here you can see that this shows 6 different types of being a fantasy to fulfill. So, you know, I mean, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the action aspect of things. Run around, shoot the baddies, things like that, make it explode, you know, everyone knows about that. But there's social aspect of trying to work together with people. There's a mastery aspect, trying to get better at something, an achievement, wanting to get all the goodies, getting all the collectibles and things like that, immersion, story, and creativity, trying to come up with your own solutions to problems. You can also see that there were a couple different team building models. This was a first time being able to work with another team on a large project like this. So you have to make sure that you're not sabotaging your own teammates unconsciously. You want to make sure that you're caring about what they have to say and what decisions they want to make, but you also can't just not challenge whatever things they have to say. So you can see here on the left, there's this balance that needs to be struck between caring personally, challenging directly. You want to reach radical candor, as it's called, and not, you know, ruinous empathy where you're caring, but you're not challenging, and things along those lines. The Tuckman model, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, is just a graph to show team effectiveness over time as team members are forming. They're figuring out what they're supposed to be doing. They're kind of coming to clash. It's like, oh, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? Norming, okay, we know what our roles are here and performing. Now we're really cooking with gas. The process of creation. Again, a couple more models here. This was all part of the experience that we ended up learning and preparing for while making a game during this whole project. I should have probably mentioned that by now, shouldn't I have? Sorry, I'm so used to people just kind of understanding that point. Our team, every team as part of SIP, was designed or was tasked with creating a game during the entire summer. And that was our goal, was to figure out what game we were going to make and then take the time to make sure that we organized our time correctly to get a sort of minimum deliverable product that could be put on a platform. And for our project, it was to make a mobile game. And I'll get more into details into that, but that's all you really need to know right now, is the fact that we're making a mobile game during this whole thing. So the process of creation was the fact that we are now in the process of creating this game. And when you first start off, as you can see on the left here, the Dunning-Kruger effect, you think, oh yeah, no, I know everything. I got this in the bag. And as you actually gain more knowledge in the field, you start to realize the nuances, the complications, how, you know, difficult it actually truly is. And your confidence starts to lower until it gets to the point where you can then start coming back around when you actually know everything that you're talking about. And the chart on the right there is just a visceral satisfaction over time. When you first start off, it has a lot of high satisfaction. And then once you get into the nitty gritty of the work and the slog of just doing it, it becomes much less satisfying until you get to the very end when it's just about done. So, making the game, our task was to create an idle game designed specifically for college students. Before we ended up joining our project, they ended up doing a survey asking a whole bunch of different college students what kind of game they'd be interested in playing. And a majority of them ended up answering idle game, which is nice because you can do it while you're at a bus. You don't have to think about dedicating a lot of time to it. You can do it in between classes. You're walking around. And we had to make it for mobile because with this chart here, mobile platform is a very much growing area compared to PC represented by orange and console represented by gray. So when we were going through, we had to come up with a whole bunch of different ideas. And boy, did our ideas suck, because we didn't understand at the time what it meant to consider our audience. And this was an important lesson. This is probably one of the most important lessons that I've had to explore. Definitely not the most important, but one definitely up there. It's the fact that you can't be too attached to an idea. You have to be okay with throwing it away. More so the fact that you need to think beyond yourself. You can't make a game that you're necessarily interested in making. You have to make a game that will automatically appeal to who you're trying to sell it to. So we were selling a game to college students. We had to make a game that automatically sounded interesting to college students. The example down here that I put is you can make a game about a fox stealing money from the king. You know, sure, that can be interesting, but no one really cares. You know, if you see Robin Hood on the cover of your game, it's like, oh yeah, sure, you know, it's like steal from the rich, give to the poor. Who wouldn't get behind that? Especially college students, right? They're all about being poor and getting money from other people. But it's the fact that, you know, no one, they're not going to make that connection. They're not going to be interested in playing a game about that, because is it really worth their time? So with the example that you see over in the parentheses, Fretlantless into Master Data into Foster, we ended up having to come up with a couple different solutions of what exactly is a college student's fantasy. Again, going back to the player model image, what do they want, and how are we going to be able to provide that for them? So we said, okay, what if we ended up having like a dating game where they get to go around using this sort of Tinder-like app, but our boss ended up not liking that sort of like polygamy, polyamorous sort of situation. So we said, okay, instead of that, let's make it so that you're taking care of animals. And that was where our game idea Foster came up with, where you have a game that's an idle game. The person can, you know, choose to take care of animals that they want to take care of, and it feels good, and they get to look at cute little animals, and they feel good for having done so, which appeals to the altruistic nature of a lot of different college students. So game mechanics, it's interesting because a lot of people, when they think about game mechanics, let's take Mario for example, they think about jumping. Mario is Mr. Jumpman after all. So one thing they ended up learning when it comes to designing games is the fact that a mechanic needs to scale on difficulty. And it's quite interesting in the fact that, you know, when you think of Mario, how do you make the game harder? You might immediately think about enemies. You might think about, you know, lava or platforms and things like that, but that's not low enough level. That's too sophisticated. What is it exactly about enemies or lava or platforms that makes it harder? It's viability of actions. With this very simple diagram here, on the left, you can see that there's an easy jump, which is just a tiny little ledge, which you can do with any sort of length of holding down the jump button. You have to press the jump button. You can't just continue walking right, but you can do a high jump, you can do a low jump. You compare that to the higher cliff jump on the right, a hard jump. You can't do a small little hop in order to get over that. You need to do a very large jump to proceed. So it turns into this window of viable jumps that allows the player to proceed. That's what difficulty is, and that's what's based off of game mechanics, is what sort of viable options does a player have to make in order to continue playing. In the example of Temple Run, to the right of that, you have to try and move forward collecting these little golden bits, avoiding obstacles as they're presented to you. The way that game scales in difficulty is that as you go forward, these obstacles start coming at you faster, so the player has less time to react, and so thus their window of being able to make a decision of what they need to do now shrinks. Design pillars are major things of designing a game. We don't need to go too much into detail with this. A lot of this presentation was designed around a game design class specifically. Making a good game pitch, also a very important skill to have when going about making a game. Juicy, baby. Juice is a technical term, and I'm not joking when I tell you this. Juice is, as I say here, all the extra stuff you add into the game that makes it flashier, fancier, and add that bit of pizzazz that makes a big difference in game feel. It doesn't actually change the way the game works. It's just all the little bits of decoration. Imagine, if you will, breakouts, a little ball that bounces against the paddle and breaks the little blocks, and you have to try and break all the blocks, right? Everyone's seen that game. Everyone's probably played it at least once, or even simpler, Pong. You know, you have two paddles going back and forth. Juice would be, okay, what if we added sound effects whenever the ball hits the paddle? What if we added screen shake whenever the ball hits the paddle? What if there was colors or particle effects that came off and added all these sort of extra bits, you know, just making it feel and look a little bit nicer. And again, analytics, a tool for coders to be able to know what players are doing, track their information, figure out where they're getting stuck, and then you can fix those problems. And then scope. This is the biggest thing. This right here. If I were to take one lesson away during anyone's project, it's an understanding of scope. And it's the scope is the scale of complexity and number of tasks in a project. And when we first started, our scope was enormous. We had no point of comparison to know what we were able to do. And so we were just thinking about these huge ideas, these grand scale projects, we were architects, we were gods of these huge games. And then you go back and you're like, oh, wait a second, how are we going to do this? Especially with the amount of time that we have. So that's one thing that always continuously remind yourself on as you're moving forward, to remind yourself that you can't get caught up in these details. You have to make sure that you're in a reasonable project and you want to keep it simple. Workspace tools. So that was orientation. That was a lot of the things we ended up learning just through the process itself as well. Workspace tools, we ended up using this online board called Miro. I highly recommend it. I think it doesn't get nearly as much love in the educational space as it should. It's a huge visual representation of a whole bunch of different pictures, files, links, notes, anything you could possibly imagine, and it allows everyone to be able to interact with it simultaneously. So it's a very useful way of organizing your information and showing where things are connecting, where they're going. You can create flowcharts, all kinds of fun stuff, as well as a repository. And a repository is basically a cloud saving system that allows people to interact with the project. So let's say I have one version of my game. I can save it, upload it to a cloud. Another teammate of mine can then pull from that cloud onto their machine, make any sort of adjustments, and then they can save it. And people can do this pulling and pushing of their edits so that everyone can work on the same thing simultaneously, as opposed to having to worry about, you know, conflicts of, oh, did you change this? Did you change that? Things like that. So very useful skill to have when working on larger projects, is being able to have version control. So with all of that being said, all that information, I'm sure you're all fascinated to see what we've come up with so far. So, as mentioned previously, the game that we came up with is Foster. And Foster is an idle game where you take care of animals. So you start off small and you build up your caring abilities to be able to foster more wild and exotic animals who also need to find their forever home. And the art style here was designed by our art director, who was Michael, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. But I think he did a phenomenal job being able to figure out an art style that is both simple, appealing, and most importantly, reproducible. But enough about the details. We've got a trailer video that I would like to be able to share. And I can also put the link into the chat when we're done, just so you can watch it on your own time, just in case the presentation doesn't happen to turn out very good. But let's give this a listen. Can you also, you can hear the audio, right? So that is where we are right now. And what we're currently working on and have been working on since the summer is adding more to the game, making sure that it feels like a fuller, proper experience, making sure that we're kind of banging out any of the hard edges, there's sharp corners like that, and be able to release it and be able to have a game that is both marketable and profitable at the exact same time. And that concludes my presentation, but I'll just leave it on this slide here.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much, Marcus.
Of course.
I also really enjoyed that. It was very well done, and succinct and clear, and it gives me a way better idea of what you all were up to this summer than I had before. I wonder if it's given you a different sense of direction as you think about your post college career. Did it help in that sense in defining what you might want to do?
Absolutely. And if nothing else, it gave me the experience to learn and fail in a professional setting without professional consequences. And I think that's the most important part about it, is that this was real work. This is work that would be expected at a professional level in a professional setting in a professional way, where we had to report to a producer and listen to a boss and do work on our own. And we were able to learn from that experience much more than we possibly could have from just a skills-based classroom setting, where it's, okay, here's how to use Unity, sure, but how does that then translate to being able to figure out making a game? So absolutely, I think this was a phenomenal experience to be able to develop my ability of both making and marketing games.
And I imagine a lot about group work and the dynamics of a team and so on and so forth.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Again, I had mentioned those team building exercises, and while I'd say we definitely, unfortunately, ended up getting along with each other rather well, I can also very easily imagine conflict arising, just in the fact that I don't know if either of you or any of you have ever experienced this of, imagine someone presents an idea saying, oh yeah, this is a good idea, but everyone else doesn't think it's a good idea. So it's like, how do you say, no, let's not do your idea because it's bad? It's, you have to present it in a way that's nice, but also challenges them directly, which again goes back to that radical candor. You can't just collapse and say, oh yeah, no, let's do that, because now you're being insincere and you're not benefiting your project either. And then if you're always collapsing under other people's ideas, then you're not going to get any good ideas. You're not going to get any substantial ideas. So it's this social team building aspect that we ended up building on top of it as well. It's like, how do we navigate scope as well as ideas, as well as being able to listen, as well as all these things that are just kind of layered on top of each other, priorities and all of those things.
I'm going to invite you to my next faculty committee meeting, because those are lessons we can learn too as we deal with issues. But anyway, no, it sounds terrific.
So Marcus, at the beginning you mentioned that this was the first time that it was all online.
Yes.
It seems like a project or process that would be perfect for online. How would that work? I can't even imagine, a group of different groups of college students getting together for a whole summer, 5 days a week, all in the same space. So how do you know how that would work? Or
so from what I've heard, and this is just primarily secondhand information, but the way it used to work at Becker College is that students would live there and they would wake up, they would go there, they would have a morning presentation, a check-in, which we also had. We had a Zoom call just to kind of check in and make sure that we were staying on track with our boss and all the other groups. And people would be able to communicate and see each other in person, and in a way that makes things easier, especially for our boss, who can kind of go around to different groups, see what they're doing, kind of have a little closer eye and hand on things to make sure that people are keeping up and doing what they're supposed So you lose a little bit of that readability with
Mhm.
people. But you are right in the fact that with being able to just work on your computer all the time anyways, and being able to have calls like we're having here, it makes it relatively easy to be able to just work cooperatively with somebody, typing away or drawing on your computer, and then say, here you go, this is what we're working on. So on that aspect, you are correct, it does work. But there's one thing that I've definitely come to appreciate more. There is a social aspect to these sort of things that can only really be expedited in person.
Mhm.
It really truly does make a difference, because I very much felt sometimes during this whole project, I was like, man, I wish I was in person. I wish I could just like see you guys. I wish I could just be there. It would make so much of a difference, and very much so with other projects as well. It's like physically being in a space makes people much more accountable.
Yeah.
You know, you have to wake up, you have to get dressed, you have to shower, you have to put on your deodorant, you have to drive, you have to make sure you eat. You have all these things, and it forces you to wake up. And now that you're in a space, you're like, okay, this is my workspace. Meanwhile, if you're on home and you're at your computer, sure, that's your workspace, but you're still at home. So you can go to your office without any pants on, for anyone cares, or without your camera on, and you're typing away and you're like, oh, I don't know if I feel like it. Yeah. So there are drawbacks to this digital format, but it's very much also beneficial in the way that it can ease moving back and forth between spaces simultaneously and sharing things.
I think that too is a good lesson for what you want to do in the future. So clearly, you want a job where at least you have in person relationships with people.
Right.
That's good to know starting off.
Absolutely.
Ben, do you have any questions? Does that help illuminate the your idea of maybe doing a minor in the?
It did teach me quite a bit of like how to make a game, because in my spare time I've been working on a game, and I've learned this this meeting has helped quite a bit understand the process and what I need to consider, and that I need to let go of some ideas if it turns out it's not the best.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that we came to learn as a team, is that, you know, you want to come up with these ideas and you might think that they're good ideas, but then someone might say, I don't know about that. I don't know if it's a good idea. And you're like, oh, well, now I feel bad because I had a part of myself as that idea. But you can't think like that, because, you know, ideas are a dime a dozen. They come and they go. And a lot of the times you have to figure these things out. And just honestly, if I were to say one piece of advice, if you're working on a game, make the game. Don't think about it. Just make it. Because the best way to figure out how to make a good game is to listen to what the game is telling you. Once you're in there, you're playing it, and you're seeing what it does, it will very keenly tell you what's missing. What do I need to add? What do I need to change? What do I need to improve in order to make this a fun experience? Because that's the most important part. A game needs to be fun. Because if it's not fun, no
Why
one's going to
bother?
play it.
Yeah.
But one thing I've definitely learned is that pre-production is a killer, and you need to sometimes just say, listen, I'm not 100% sure this idea is, but this one's good enough, and we're going for it.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question for, does anybody else have specific questions about MassDigi for Marcus? Because otherwise I have a question for our students.
I do have a question. Would there be one for this year? And if so, where can I sign up?
So yes, there is SIP going on right now, and we are looking for an artist right now. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure what the availability for an additional coder is right now. We are very much looking for underclassmen. Are you a sophomore or a junior, perchance?
Technically, I'm a junior, but in terms of like computer science, I'm a freshman.
I see. Um, So with that being the case, you may want to reach out to, shoot, who would I recommend you reaching out to? I'm not sure who to put you into contact with, but I can definitely put your name forward to some of the faculty at CVPA as well as to Monty to keep you in mind during the next semester, perhaps, in order to be able to pull you on as a team member, as a potential team member for next semester.
Okay, thank you.
Ben, why don't you tell me your email right now and I'll make sure that we get it over to.
Yeah, actually, do you
Okay.
think you could get him in contact? Since
Uh,
do you have Monty's email, Anne Marie?
I can find it, I'm sure.
Alrighty, thank
Uh,
you.
Do you want me to put it in chat?
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, so I have a quick question for both Marcus and Ben. So you're both studying remotely this semester, I imagine?
Yes.
Yes.
And how are you finding it?
It's interesting. As a digital artist and as someone who's taking up coding, it's not that different from how I would go about my day normally. Oh, I can also stop sharing here. Let me do that. It's not different from how I would normally treat my day in the fact that if I were at school, I would be at a computer, I would be working away at whatever project I was on. And when I went back to my apartment, I would also be at my computer working away at any sort of project that I was on. So the space that I'm in is just about the same. And so that makes making work or doing work relatively easy. The biggest difference I've noticed is the social aspect of it. And I had mentioned this previously, is the fact that being able to talk with people and see people's faces is important. And as someone as myself who's also minoring in music, you know, you have to be able to sing or perform in a certain space. And so if I'm singing in my room, it's going to sound different. And the fact that I'm not singing with a choir in Auditorium 153 is also going to sound different and be different. So there's that aspect of it, the actual physical differences. But one thing I've come to learn is that working at home gets to you after a while. You know, you're not working at home anymore, you're living at work. You're always in this space. You don't get to separate yourself from these spaces. It's no longer, oh, I go to work. Okay, work is work. I go to home. Home is home. They've now blended together into one space, and there is no separation anymore. They're all just one big clump of time every single day. And that gets to people, I'd imagine, very easily, where it's like, what do you have to look forward to? At what point does the work day end? At what point do you have a vacation? You know, you can't even travel. So what, are you going to have a vacation at home? Your home's your work. You're having a vacation at work now.
Yeah, the feeling's the same. I find that I'm working pretty much every hour of every day since since this semester, and my home has started to feel more it's just like a workplace that I just sleep in. I do kind of miss going to university. I do enjoy going there. I do miss the social aspect of going to university, seeing people's faces, because in many of the Zoom meetings I've been in, many people have their cameras off, so I can't really know what they look like and get a feel for who they are.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, as someone who's been working at home, you have, I mean, nailed it for home. Everyone, I think, who's working at home as well. You know, professionals too. Those are the same. But you both seem to be holding up really well. Are you still enjoying your classes and feel like you're learning effectively? Yes.
Yeah, I feel like I am learning.
I can say that I was learning a lot more in my prior year classes when it was a lot of skill-based sort of stuff. One thing that I feel is unfortunate, just based on the fact of Capstone being as late as it is that I think at that point it's too late. I think, and this is one thing that I was talking about with my professors when I was doing this presentation with them, if there were to be some sort of more work related experience earlier in order to be able to give students the opportunity to figure out what scope is, to be able to make these projects on their own and to fail, and then be able to take that learning experience, apply it to their capstone. That would, I think, be an overall more beneficial learning experience that would give students the opportunity to really figure out what it's like to work on a project rather than just doing a homework assignment.
Interesting.
I think that's a really important point, and a point that, is part of conversations in a lot of different areas as we move forward. How do you combine real life experience with the learning experience in a way that enriches without taking away from the learning experience and what you need to know before you can function in a work environment? It's complicated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But if I were to push a recommendation, I would definitely say to have something very similar to the MassDigi or the SIP experience, where you get a group of people working on a project together over an extended period of time and make them come up with these decisions, learn these things, and then have them apply those skills on their own afterwards to be able to understand how much work they actually can do over time, figure out these things on their own, come up with their own solutions, do their own research. And I think at that rate, when they're doing their own research on things that they're interested in, they're going to learn it a lot better than if a professor were to just say, research the medieval period. Sure, you can have them research that and write a 500-word paper on it, but they're not going to be particularly invested in that information unless they have a motivation of their own to figure out, oh, well, what kind of weapons did they use in the medieval period? Oh, they used these kinds of weapons. Why did they use these kind of weapons? Oh, it's because this technology wasn't invented yet, or maybe there's a particular culture around it. It's like dueling pistols or like heavy armor, and the fact that people would just hit each other on the shoulders and they would just kind of exhaust each other rather than actually hurting themselves. So, you get to learn these things on their own, and people and students become interested on figuring it out on their own. And then it becomes much easier to be able to write these academic papers on a subject that captures their interest.
I think that's very true. And I'm interested in having a follow-up conversation with you because I want to know more in depth what you're thinking, but I won't do it here.
Right.
So I muted myself, which is not good for the host when talking. Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss, Lawrence? I do have some questions for you, but I feel like we can do those offline at some point because they are for the specific email in the future. So we can do those later. But is there anything else anyone would like to talk about or add? Lawrence, do you have any final comments?
I want to thank Marcus for his presentation. It was really terrific, and I think will help people understand not just what MassDigi did for you, but what what a partnership with something like MassDigi can do for CVPA. So thank you for that. I have to say that MassDigi is just one of the many really exciting things that are happening at CVPA as CVPA works more and more to engage with community, because engaging with community brings students experiences, brings experiences to the community, but brings students experiences across the board, whether they're digital artists or designers or musicians or studio artists that are enormously important. So I'm about to embark on this walk with visiting artist Tracy Cockrell, where students have worked with her to ask people to hear their environment, not just to see it or to touch it, but to hear it. And I can't wait to see what that's like. So CVPA is strong. CVPA is busy. CVPA is dealing with the unusual learning circumstances, and I think making lemonade out of some lemons that we've been handed. I'm really pleased and happy anytime to share that with people who are interested in knowing.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Marcus, for that presentation. You know, I, of course, play games on my phone, had no idea how much effort and work went into them. So
You'd be surprised. You'd
it's
be
amazing.
surprised.
And I can't do those big jumps, so I don't know. So I can appreciate that. That's a really good skill. I understand it now. I'm going to go at it better. So thank you very much for your work and your help here. That was great. It looks like it will really be useful to you in the future, which is the most important thing, you know, as you step out soon to graduate. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Dean, for participating today. Early morning Saturday, and it turns out it's sunny, not rainy. So I think people have stepped out rather than joining us. But this was really informative, and I appreciate you joining us this morning. And
I had to retreat to the car, not because I ran out of juice, but because it's chilly outside.
well, the walk will help you with that.
Yep.
And thank you, Chancellor Preble, and thank you, Ben, for attending. I will see you, I hope, at some other events today.
Thank you for hosting this.
No, thank you. I really thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Me too. Thanks, everybody.